arrived and there they found a absolutely horrific scene inside.
46-year-old Jill Howell had been attacked in her own home.
The victim was lying on the floor, having been stabbed 15 times.
For someone to stab someone so many times, there's clearly a friend. There's clearly an emotional attachment to this.
Sadly, there wasn't an opportunity to save Jill's life because she was dead when the police came through the door. They would have found a half-eaten meal. They would have found a bottle of wine. But they would also noticed on her head was written the word bully.
I met Jill through a mutual friend, and from the day we met, Jill and I had one big thing in common, and that was our love of Brighton and Hove Albion Football Club. And we used to go to football together all the time. And it wasn't just Brighton, we used to go to see other clubs. We went to see England as well.
Sean is a former detective with 30 years service, and Jill works in payroll, volunteering in her spare time for the Samaritans.
We bonded over a lot of things. We went on holiday together, we went to the theatre, we liked ballet together, and it seemed that everything we did together was fantastic, and I certainly enjoyed it.
In 2016, Sean was appointed Mayor of Worthing and had the honour of taking Jill to the late Queen's Garden Party at Buckingham Palace.
Whilst we were there, Prince Philip saw my chain that I was wearing, which was the chain of Worthing Borough Council. Said, "That's a rather magnificent chain you're wearing. Where are you from?" And I said I was from Worthing. And we had a brief conversation. He then turned to Jill and he shook her hand. And all I can remember is her massive beaming smile the whole time she was talking to him. And at one point this lady came up behind him and he turned around to her and said, "Oh, I'll be with you in a minute." And it was the Queen. And I thought there was no other person in this country that could speak to the Queen like that. And it just made us laugh.
Jill had been committed to her Samaritans work for several years.
It was something that she really loved. She could talk to people because she had a great understanding of people's difficulties in life. She was able to talk to people about how they felt, and I think she gave a lot to it.
In 2015, Jill was headhunted by the University of Brighton and offered a job as their head of payroll and pensions. She was tasked with improving efficiency.
Been an atmosphere, if you like, or a culture that the university felt was unhelpful. So maybe it was underachieving. So they brought in Jill Howell to actually improve it and to get it to the standards that they wanted.
It would have been very difficult for Jill to walk into that type of team who are established, who believe they are working very efficiently and effectively, and all of a sudden she's maybe been given targets to hit, make them more efficient.
She had to change things and bring people up more modern ways of thinking. She knew it was going to be quite tough going in. I don't think she viewed that as a problem, she viewed that as a challenge.
One of the old guard was Deputy Payroll Manager David Browning, who had worked in the department for 26 years.
She was seen as being too demanding. Browning would be saying, "Look, I've been doing this job for X number of years, you've come in here, you hardly know how we work, and you're trying to impose yourself on us."
Within a short period of time, friction began to develop.
I think he set out to make her job harder than it had to be. And so that would have been a challenge for Jill. And she would have had to have been firm. That's what she was there for. That's what she was paid to do.
Colleagues reported hearing Jill and David Browning arguing within the office and her having to raise her voice and exert her authority over him, which he obviously didn't appreciate too much.
Anyone who goes to work in a new department and they're going to make changes, Jill would have faced quite a lot of opposition and possibly resentment.
In 2016, a tragic event triggered personal challenges for Browning.
1 year after Jill had arrived, there was a freak accident where his father fell off a ladder and he lost his life, and that would have had a profound effect on him.
Browning was 50 years old and married with 2 children.
Browning went from being a happy, friendly family man to being much more withdrawn within himself he was suffering from depression and wasn't engaging in the same way.
Jill offered him an olive branch. She had experienced grief herself, having lost her own parents.
Jill became supportive of him, helping him, counselling him through that process, relying on her experiences working for the Samaritans as a volunteer.
She showed extraordinary compassion, she showed above and beyond, she was tuned in and empathetic to what Browning was going through.
I think that her kindness was an opportunity that Browning saw, really. Her emotion of wanting to help, he could actually turn that into an advantage to him. It was almost a hook he felt he could keep her under control.
Following the death of David Browning's father, his boss, Samaritans volunteer Jill Howell, wanted to support her colleague.
Jill recognised some of the difficulties David Browning was having with his grief.
The only time she ever said to me anything about problems at work was that she had problems with one of the members of staff. She never mentioned his name or anything about him, just said that she's dealing with it and he's got some personal problems which were affecting his work, and she was trying to help him work through it, and that was all she said.
Clearly she was keen to support him, and they met once at the Sigelman pub, just quite near to Jill's home, and had a drink on an evening after work. By becoming better friends with David Browning, I think Jill found she became more part of the team that had initially rejected her.
He was married with 2 children, and there wasn't a suspicion that he was someone that was flying here, there and everywhere trying to have relationships. It was very much that he was an ordinary man doing a very worthwhile job and going home to a family.
Jill remained professional, but Browning developed different feelings.
Browning became overly fixated with the support Jill was giving him. It could be that he had some sort of romantic infatuation with her, or it could merely have been that he was hooked on the attention she was paying him.
After their evening drink, Browning texts Jill, "Thank you for tonight. I managed to get to know you so much better. I ran out of time, so would like another beer sometime in the future."
I think Browning possibly built too much into the kindness that she offered, and suppose there was more there.
He continued, "I adore you personally and professionally, and we will get there. I am there for you on any subject at any time."
When someone goes out for a platonic type relationship drink and then they receive a text message which talks about "I adore you professionally," I think the use of the word adore, it would be something that would ring alarm bells. But he said not only does he professionally adore her, personally adores her.
A friend of Jill's asked whether there was something more to her relationship with David Browning than met the eye, and Jill's answer to that question was very much no, there wasn't. But David Browning's perception of his relationship with Jill was clearly very different, and looking at the affectionate nature of quite a number of the text messages and his admiration for Jill, complimenting her on her appearance, on her clothing, or a particular dress she'd worn on a particular occasion. And it was clear that David Browning had developed an affectionate relationship with Jill Howell, which he very much wanted to advance.
Browning tried to arrange a further drink with Jill, but this was cancelled.
A text message to your boss making references to the way she looks, he's flirting with her. He's actually sort of going well beyond the boss helping me with my depression.
Jill Howell's view appeared to be that they were work colleagues, they were friends, and Jill, as somebody who was volunteering for the Samaritans, felt able to assist Browning with his depression, and that was as far as it went, as far as Jill was concerned.
Over time, Jill started to become concerned about Browning's mental state.
Jill felt that this had gone beyond her help. Browning was talking about suicide, Browning was talking about some very serious matters, and she did exactly what you'd expect a professional person to do. Jill actually referred him to HR, Human Resources.
But Browning didn't react positively.
Browning seemed to be irritated and quite upset by having his affections spurn, but also by being referred elsewhere for help.
To lift his spirits, Jill invited Browning round to her house for supper.
I think Jill indulged Browning because I think she did genuinely care about him as a manager, but also as a person. He was someone who was vulnerable, and she could help. It's important that you are able to have a professional relationship with your team, but there has to be a boundary. And so you can have a sociable relationship, but only to a certain degree. Because if there are boundaries that become blurred, then there's a danger that people can exploit that as well and take advantage of that.
There was nothing that would suggest that was a flowering romance, and even though he rocked up with, wine and flowers, I think that Jill was managing the situation to the best of her ability to help a work colleague. She was just a kind person that wanted to help people.
Later that evening, Browning texted her. Book me in for another chat in September, October. I think you realise how much you actually mean to me as a friend. I will continue to be inappropriate at times to make you laugh and smile. Every Jill needs a Dave.
When he talks about how he will continue to behave inappropriately if it means getting a laugh, the fact that he's aware of his behaviours being inappropriate, Jill must have brought this to his attention.
In further discussions with Jill, Browning's language became less playful and more manipulative.
His behaviour moved into the realms of being controlling and jealous. He expressed a view to her that he never wanted her to leave the department. He wanted her to be his alone.
He added that Jill must never get a boyfriend because he needed her for support.
The fact he's now suggesting that, she should not even have a boyfriend is a really sinister and worrying development.
He'd become intensely jealous and wanted to control Jill Howell for his own benefit.
Jill did speak to some of her friends about Browning, but she seemed to feel she had control of the situation. On occasion, she told him when he'd overstepped the mark and did say to him, "You shouldn't make comments like this."
Jill persuaded Browning to begin his psychotherapy appointments.
He reported that it made him feel that he was more messed up than he thought. The intimacy that he had enjoyed with Jill was now being shared, and he didn't want to do that, and he didn't find that any value in seeing the psychotherapist, and he felt that Jill had betrayed him.
Browning had the last of 3 counselling sessions on the 24th of October. After his counselling sessions ended, it appeared Jill was still the person Browning most wanted to discuss his problems with.
Jill had a lot of experience of talking with people who were actively suicidal, and maybe she did believe that she had control of the situation.
Still concerned about his state of mind, Jill invited Browning round to try and cheer him up.
David Browning had already had dinner that night with his family and then left to go to Jill Howell's house.
Jill made a curry, and they ate the curry, and they continued chatting. They drank about half the bottle of wine between the two of them, and they continued talking till fairly late.
He clearly has an expectation that this relationship that Jill sees as platonic and professional is going to take another step, and that is they're going to become intimate, possibly going to become lovers.
The evening came to an end. It was about 11 p.m.
Jill told him it was probably time he should be thinking about leaving, and he replied that he couldn't leave because he'd already posted his suicide notes. Jill, being the supportive, Samaritan, kind-natured person she was, told him she would need to take him to a hospital, and she turned to put her shoes on.
Police, what's your emergency? Hi, I need to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act. I'm at John Street police station, but I can't seem to get in there to speak to somebody.
Okay. Browning couldn't get into the front desk of the police station when he arrived, So he called from the phone on the outside of the police station.
Have you called an ambulance?
No, I don't need an ambulance.
If you need to be sectioned, then that's the best place people to be with is the ambulance.
Well, I've got a shotgun in my hand, so it's probably not the best idea. It's not loaded, and it's covered, and it's safe. But I tried to commit suicide and I want to hand it in. So,
Okay, no, that's fine. You didn't say that. That's the place to be then, isn't it, the police station?
The nature and the tone of his voice, the lack of emotion in his voice, it's very matter of fact. It looks like he knows what he's doing.
What's your name, please?
David Browning.
Okay, and you're outside the police station now?
Yeah. I'm in the car park where all the vans are.
Okay.
There's more to it than that, but I'll just explain that when I speak to an officer.
Officers handcuffed Browning and took him in, where he made a stunning revelation.
Tell what's happened.
Yeah, no, sure, I've killed my boss.
Killed your boss. Where have you killed him? Where have you killed him?
Sandgate Road.
Sandgate Road. And where is Sandgate Road?
Hostage Road.
What do you want to tell me?
Browning displayed a male totally in control of himself, almost directing the police officers.
Yeah, front door said David. Okay.
As you go in,
Yeah.
there's some shotgun shells on the table.
Okay.
Boxes. Okay. 6 boxes.
There seems to be no agitation, no distress, no evidence of him being traumatised by what's happened. It seems very matter of fact. He seems quite calm about it.
If it's time to arrest him. Yeah, special emergency.
David, based on what you've told us, okay, the time is now 6:20 a.m. I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder. Okay, you didn't have to say anything, but it may harm events. If you do not mention one question, something which you later on in court, anything you do say may be given evidence. Do you understand that?
I felt that was just another piece of the jigsaw, part of his premeditated plan.
On the 26th of October, reporter Emily Wallin was on her way into work.
My usual bus route passed along the end of Sandgate Road, and there were a couple of police cars at that stage, and being my job to investigate police incidents, I got off the bus and went to see. It was still very early and the road was being slowly closed off to members of the public, and within minutes more and more police vehicles were arriving and crime scene tents were being set up. Because it's such a close-knit community, very quickly it became clear that it was Jill's house that was at the centre of the police activity, and her neighbours began to wonder what had happened to Jill and whether she was okay.
Those police officers going in are human beings. I know everyone thinks you're not as a police officer, but they're human beings. So they will be confronted with a traumatic situation. As they went up into the front room, they would have found the lifeless body of Jill, and the first thing they would have noticed was that she had stab wounds, and blood would have been around the body.
Jill Howell was found in the lounge on her back, cold to the touch with no pulse.
She had been very, very violently attacked. She had been stabbed in the front and in the back 15 times.
Jill's body bore signs of a highly personal attack.
The word bully had been inscribed in inch-high letters in a marker pen on her forehead.
To write the word bully on Jill's head is both bizarre and inexplicable, but it also looks like someone trying to say, I'm the victim here. Browning had a cynical belief that he could manipulate the system, that he could say, look, I've got a history of being bullied, there's been conflict between Jill and myself, I'm also a crusader for the rest of my team who also felt that she was a bully, and this is a culmination of all of those injustices.
And graffiti was scrawled on the wall.
Spray painted on the wall of Jill's living room was the words, blame Sean McDonald.
Detectives had to investigate how a fellow colleague was linked to a murder investigation. Was he a victim, or could he have been Browning's accomplice?
I was still working for Sussex Police support staff. I was getting ready for work, and at 8 o'clock in the morning, a police officer was on my doorstep doing a welfare check on me. And he came in and said to me, she then said to me, do you know a guy called David Browning? And I said, I've never heard of him. I'd never heard that name before. Jill had never mentioned his name, and he said, well, he's been arrested for it.
Police now had to determine whether Sean MacDonald also had any motive for killing Jill.
This was somebody who was traumatised by the death of a close friend. But his movements would have been checked. They would have asked him very intrusive questions. They would have established where he was that night. They would have established any links between him and David Browning. You're either ruling in a suspect, that could be a suspect, or you're ruling out someone.
Police began a thorough forensic examination.
Once they established this is a murder, that moment is all about gathering evidence. So you are making sure you're doing the best for Jill. You can't save her life now. The least we can do is to get her and her family some justice.
The dinner they had eaten was still on the table. The remains of the curry they'd shared was there. Half the bottle of wine was still in the bottle, undrunk.
They would have photographed the scene, videoed the scene. They would have called experts in to try and pick up as much DNA, dust for fingerprints, and make sure that every bit of evidence that could be gleaned from that crime scene was taken. They would have noticed that Jill only had one shoe on, which suggested that maybe she was putting her shoes on. There were defence injuries on her hands, and underneath the nails they found DNA of Browning's.
Police revealed a note left by Browning on the dining room table, which read, "I have to tell you that I was in cahoots with Sean MacDonald."
The police wanted statements as to how I knew Jill, but what I found a bit strange was they started asking me where I'd been the night before. And I had been out, and I'd been at a pub, and I was playing cards. And I could prove where I was, because I can tell you who the person was who was sitting opposite me the whole evening. I had to give his name and explain to them where I was. And it was very confusing. Why were you asking where I was last night? Because there's absolutely nothing to do with me. It was only afterwards it was disclosed to me that David Browning had tried to implicate me in the murder. Which I've got to stop. Sorry. Take a breath.
Despite his alibi, detectives uncovered amendments to... The inquiry focused solely on Browning, investigating his actions before Jill's death to uncover his intent and state of mind.
David Browning purchased the murder weapon. He also purchased the shotgun, which wasn't ultimately the weapon he used either to harm himself or Jill, unless he had it with him that night.
Police tried to unlock why a pensions and payroll advisor would be in control of lethal weapons.
David Browning had applied for a shotgun licence, and he'd been granted one.
He then made purchases from a Brighton store, claiming they were for hunting game and clay pigeon shooting.
Browning had purchased a second-hand shotgun and 50 cartridges. And a knife which is designed for if you're shooting wildfowl, if you're shooting game, and it would leave quite severe injuries because it's designed to sort of cut up fowl. They found that he'd hired a van. They found that he had a change of clothes.
He then parked the van near to Jill's home. These are all indicators that he was preparing for something he was expecting to do.
Well, I've got a shotgun in my hand. It's not loaded, and it's covered, and it's safe. But I tried to get to the side.
There was a lot of planning into this process of getting a gun, but in the end, he didn't use the gun. So the logic of what this process was is not clear to anyone other than him.
Investigators started a thorough examination of his phone.
The police would check all the phone records. Browning tried to erase those of the documents on his phone. On Jill's phone, you could track all of the messages. Browning had tried to get rid of it, so you send it off to some clever person somewhere that can actually find the messages for you. And you could see his messages were trying to form a relationship. Jill's messages were trying to help a human being.
Police also discovered Browning added Sean's contact details to his phone 3 days before the murder, despite having never met him.
My name, my phone number and my address were all in his phone. I was staggered by that. I don't know, he'd obviously done a lot of work trying to find out who I was, where I lived, and everything about me so that he could set me up for this.
Browning told police that after killing Jill, he stayed in her house for several hours. Detectives needed to find out what he did during that time.
David Browning's phone records show that he deleted some text messages. He also posted a picture on Facebook with a little cartoon that said, "Stand up to bullies and then kill them," with a quite grotesque picture of a little cartoon man being speared by a dagger. And he also rang the Samaritans, the charity which Jill herself had given so much of her time to supporting.
We talked about wanting to end his life, and if ever there was going to be a moment to end it, it would have been after he murdered Jill. But he didn't do it.
It's a particular insult to Jill's memory as someone who devoted so much of her life to the Samaritans that he would see fit to call upon them to support him after he's killed her.
The circumstantial evidence was so heavy that Browning was charged with murder and remanded in custody awaiting trial.
Sussex Police, what's your emergency?
Hi, I need to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act. I'm at John Street Police Station, but I can't seem to get in there to speak to somebody.
Okay.
His initial remark is that he's asking to be sectioned.
For anyone else, first thing they would say is, "Please, you need to get someone here. I've done something terrible. I've killed someone." He doesn't mention that at all. It's all about him. You call it narcissism. And he's already looking like he's planning his strategy for his defence.
Have you called an ambulance?
No, I don't need an ambulance. I've got a shotgun in my hand, so it's probably not the best idea.
He could have been telling you that he'd had a piece of toast for his breakfast.
It's not loaded, and it's covered, and it's safe. But I tried to commit suicide, I don't want to hand it in. So,
Okay, no, that's fine. You didn't say that. That's the place to be then, isn't it, the police station? What's your name, please?
David Browning.
Okay, and you're outside the police station now?
Yep. I'm in the car park where all the vans are.
Okay.
There's more to it than that, but I'll explain that when I speak to an officer.
And the understatement of saying there's a bit more to it than that is astonishing.
Yes, I'm sure I've killed my boss. Killed your boss? Where have you killed him? Where have you killed him? Sandgate Road.
He doesn't look like someone who's just killed his boss in a frenzy.
The front door's there, David. Okay. As you go in, there's some shotgun shells on the table. Okay, 2 boxes.
It's a just completely emotionless conversation. He seems neither upset nor remorseful.
I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder. Okay, you didn't have to say anything, but may harm events. Do not mention one question.
I think he's understood what he's done, and that is damage limitation. It's all about him. He's looking after himself. He's got no sympathy for Jill. He couldn't care less about that. He doesn't need to be sectioned. He needs to go into prison.
Even though he admitted killing Jill, when Browning takes the stand, the path to justice isn't clear-cut. David Browning's trial began. He pleaded not guilty to murder, instead claiming manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility.
That means he was accepting he had killed Jill, but not that he had deliberately intended to murder her.
When I heard that, I realised just what a coward he was. And I thought, you cannot take responsibility for your own actions, and he's going to try and tell the court something that is a lie.
If Browning was able to successfully convince the jury that he was mentally ill when he murdered Jill, then there's every chance that he would have been found guilty of manslaughter. He could have been sent then to a secure unit or a high security hospital, and who knows, within a couple of years, back into the community.
The police hoped the evidence gathered during their investigation would convince the jury Browning committed murder.
He was trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. And the prosecution role is to say, not accepting manslaughter, because I don't believe that's the correct finding for what has happened. It's not right for Jill. This was a premeditated plan, murder.
It was clear to the prosecution team that David Browning viewed Jill in a very different way to the way Jill Howell viewed him. His motive was jealousy, was anger that Jill Howell had rejected him, had rejected his advances, had rejected his wish for their relationship to move from a friendly, social, professional relationship into an intimate relationship.
David Browning took the unusual step of taking the stand.
David Browning did accept that he was the person who caused Jill Howell's death, and not only that, he chose to give a very detailed explanation of quite literally a blow-by-blow account of how he'd stabbed Jill Howell. The real issue was his state of mind at the time, his ability to form a rational judgment.
Browning felt by giving evidence in his own trial, he'd already shown that he had an ability to try and manipulate the situation, but he also believed that he could manipulate the jury as well.
Browning gave a detailed version of events.
It was his case that he bought a shotgun and had it with him in order to take his own life. He told the jury that he sat there considering for quite some time, having killed Jill, whether to take his own life, but ultimately decided he was unable to do so. The psychiatric evidence from the prosecution experts at trial was that David Browning's intention to take his own life wasn't really a serious intention.
That night, Browning brought a holdall containing a set of clothes to Jill's house. The court claimed this showed premeditation.
If you're going somewhere with a change of clothes and you're going to shoot yourself, that don't add up, does it? If you've killed someone, do you really need a change of clothes to shoot yourself?
The prosecution suggested David Browning hoped to spend that night at Jill Howell's house and to have a change of clothes available for himself the following morning. The other reason related to his plan to kill her. David Browning wanted to have a change of clothes available to him if some of Jill's blood ended up on his clothes.
The jury also heard evidence of David Browning's attempt to deflect blame for Jill's death onto Sean MacDonald.
David Browning altered Jill Howell's pension documents a week or so before he killed Jill, so that Sean MacDonald appeared to be the beneficiary of Jill's pension arrangements, which wasn't the case at all.
When Browning was in the witness box, he was very uncomfortable with certain questions as to how did he know me and had he met me, had he forged the death in service benefit. He had to admit that he had lied all the way through, and every time he was asked an uncomfortable question, he'd be scratching his head. He was very arrogant in court, trying to tell everybody the reason he'd murdered Jill was because of his depression, and it wasn't, it was because of his jealousy, totally his jealousy.
Browning's feelings towards Sean MacDonald, the man he'd never met, were driven entirely by jealousy, because David Browning knew that Sean MacDonald was a good friend of Jill's, and they'd been on holiday together earlier that summer. David Browning was aware of that. He had seen photographs, and it was perfectly clear that Browning became intensely jealous of Sean MacDonald and decided to kill Jill Howell when she spurned his advances. If he couldn't have Jill Howell, then nobody else should.
Browning claimed to the court psychiatrist that he had a love-hate relationship with Jill. She'd referred him for counselling. That made him feel worse and was another reason why he killed her.
Browning's evidence was that really the last thing he said he did before he left Jill Howell's house to go to the police station that morning was to take out a marker pen and to write the word bully on her forehead.
In addition, Browning said he posted several suicide notes.
There was a note to one of his work colleagues which tried to suggest that the reason for David Browning killing Jill Howell was related to the difficulties he'd found in his relationship with her at work, the allegation he made that she was bullying, that she was a difficult boss.
But Browning's evidence in court told a different story.
I don't believe for 1 second she was a bully. The evidence doesn't say that at all. If anything, it says she was a really incredibly kind person who went more than the extra mile for the community.
David Browning said at trial that he didn't think Jill Howell really was a bully at all. He accepted that that wasn't in any way an accurate reflection of Jill Howell.
While it was acknowledged by both sides that Browning was struggling with depression, the defence worked hard to convince the jury it was the reason Jill was killed.
Not all people who are mentally ill and who commit a crime will be adjudged to have diminished responsibility. So a person may well have depression, but it doesn't mean that they did not have control or understanding or capacity when they carried out their crime.
At the end of the trial, the jury were ready to give their verdict.
I don't think a true word came out of his mouth the whole time he was there. And I think the jury saw through that, and they returned a very quick guilty verdict for murder. And it was a fantastic moment when they did that, because we realised that he couldn't manipulate anybody else.
For a jury to convict in just 3 hours is virtually unheard of on a murder trial.
It was overwhelming evidence that this man was not in any way influenced by an illness when he did what he did to Jill. He was influenced by anger and rejection. You've come here saying you've got diminished responsibilities, but your actions are that of someone of premeditated, cold murder.
The judge said that Browning's fixation escalated from a crush into an obsession, that he had exaggerated his symptoms to gain Jill's sympathy, and that anger and jealousy drove him to kill. David Browning was sentenced to 28 years in prison. After her death, Brighton and Hove Albion Football Club held a tribute for Jill. A minute's applause on the 75th minute of the game.
The last game that Jill had seen Brighton play was away at West Ham's ground, and Glenn Murray had scored a goal in the 75th minute, so they did a minute's applause in the 75th minute, and I was there sitting with her nephew. Really, really emotional, very difficult, but a wonderful tribute to her. Also at Brighton's ground, on the wall is one of the bricks, and it's got her name on there, and it's got the words "Keep the Faith." Sorry. That's the saddest thing, because the world lost a beautiful person, and she gave love out to everybody. She gave love out to Browning, and all he could do was reward her with hatred.
The stab wounds on both victims were on the right side of the neck.
It just didn't have the feel of random. You know what I'm saying?
Immediately, they all knew, yes, we are dealing with a serial killer here.
He feels like they have sabotaged his career as a doctor. The investigators firmly believe that he was on his way to kill more people that he held a grudge against.
This was the biggest trial in the state of Nebraska in more than half a century. I'm Henry Cordes. I'm a reporter and staff writer for the Omaha World Herald newspaper in Nebraska. It was the talk of the neighborhood when the first news reports broke that a young boy and an older woman in a house literally right up the street from me, had been murdered. This is just not the kind of stuff that typically happens in my neighborhood. I mean, most people have heard of Warren Buffett. Where these murders occurred was about 6 blocks from his house. It's a very nice neighborhood, and it just came as a shock to everyone. These murders had occurred in the home of a very prominent doctor named Bill Hunter, who had arrived home from work one day to shockingly find that his 11-year-old son, Tommy, and then Sherman, a person who came weekly to the Hunter house to clean, had both been murdered.
I am Jeff Sherman, and I am Shirley Sherman's son. She was 57 years old at the time of her murder. I had spoke to her the day before. We were supposed to meet up. She was supposed to help me with some paperwork stuff. Never got the call, which I thought was odd. And then got a call from my father about 11 11 p.m. that night that my mom had been murdered.
They had both been stabbed to death. In fact, they'd been killed with knives that had been taken right from the kitchen. The killer had actually left the knives impaled in their necks.
You go through life thinking things like this, you see it on TV, you think things like this never happen to you, and then when it does happen to you, you're just floored. The first thought was, why her? What did she do to deserve this? So you got all kinds of just crazy thoughts rolling through your mind. It was very, very, very tough the first 24 hours. We were just left with a lot of questions and no answers.
I'm Dr. Brianna Fox. I'm a professor in the Department of Criminology at the University of South Florida. Despite the fact that these were such brutal murders and a child was killed in such a vicious way, there was really nothing that led investigators to a potential suspect.
Part of the problem in this case from the very beginning was that police didn't even know who the intended victim was. Was it Tommy, the young boy? Was it Shirley? Was it Dr. Hunter or his wife, who was also a physician? You know, were they perhaps the intended victims?
There's nothing stolen out of that house. My mom had like a bunch of cash in her purse that was never touched. From what I was told, that the Hunter's home was a very nice home, so I'm sure they had a lot of valuables. None of those things were taken. Nothing. So you can kind of rule a robbery out. So rule pretty quick if nothing's missing.
Of their youngest son was just devastating for the whole Hunter family. And Tom was just a bright kid that everybody loved. You know, even though he was only 11 years old at the time, everyone could see Tommy one day growing up to become a doctor like his mother or father, or a scientist, or really whatever he wanted to do.
My mom didn't have any enemies. My mom was loved by everybody. She bartended and she cleaned houses for a living. My mom wasn't rich by any means, you know, but she was living as comfortable as she wanted to live, because at that time in her life, her focus was her grandchildren. They were looking at some of my mom's relationships. My mom didn't date a lot of people. She was married one time. They started looking into maybe some past boyfriends, things like that. We all had to be interviewed. They all swabbed our DNA and did some other stuff. We even had to take lie detector tests, which I thought was kind of weird, but that maybe it's part of their process on eliminating suspects.
Frankly, that didn't go anywhere, and so they looked into circumstances related to Tommy. You know, could have this been some type of, pedophile who was targeting Tommy? Was it someone who knew him from school? In the case of Dr. Hunter, both he and his wife, who was also a physician, they had certainly dozens, if not hundreds, of patients over the years, including some who maybe weren't really happy with something happens.
It just didn't have the feel of random. You know what I'm saying? Like there was something, they were missing something.
As the investigation proceeds, there are a couple of potential leads. I'm Dr. Joni Johnston, a clinical forensic psychologist and private investigator. A couple of the neighbors report seeing an olive-skinned man around that time. One person talks about the fact that they had locked eyes with this man and he had kind of sped up and left. And as it turns out later, parked on a different street. Other people have cited this kind of silver Honda CR-V that was unfamiliar with the neighborhood.
This olive-skinned man just remained a mystery man. They could not figure out who he was and what he was doing there. A year passed. There was still no arrest. The Hunter family marked the 1-year anniversary of it with kind of a candlelight vigil outside their home, and it just only served to underscore the fact that they did not know who did this, and the police frankly had no idea who had done it.
We put our reward, we upped the reward, and then we got it on America's Most Wanted, but nothing really came out of that at all. My uncles all got together with my grandfather and they hired a private investigator. The private investigators turned everything over to the feds. The feds, all they did was pass it on to the Omaha Police Department. And that was it.
The police were just very frustrated. The case had hit a dead end. At one point, they even brought in an FBI profiler. The FBI profile came up with a lot of theories. A lot of them really, in the end, didn't come out to be true, but the profiler was very right in one thing he said. He said, you might not catch this guy until he kills again.
From about 2008 to 2013, it was a cold case. There wasn't a lot to really go on for the Omaha Police Department.
Omaha police were called to a home in the western part of the city where they found a older man and an older woman dead in their home. The man had been shot and the woman had been stabbed, and the older man had also been stabbed as well. On the floor were pieces of a handgun. In fact, the clip that held the ammunition had kind of dropped down right in the doorway, kind of fallen apart. One of the detectives who showed up at the scene was a police officer named Derek Moyse, who had been very much involved in the Hunter killings. It looked familiar to him. He saw 2 bodies down on the floor. He saw that both appeared to have been stabbed to death. And surely had occurred, and the stabbings had occurred with knives that had been taken from the home. These victims were Dr. Roger Brumbach and his wife. And Roger was a colleague of Bill Hunter in the Creighton University Department of Pathology.
I get a call from my uncles, and I'm out in Colorado at the time. I'm working, and he said, hey, there's been a second set of murders. Another person from Creighton University had been murdered.
Immediately, they all knew, yes, we are dealing with a serial killer here. And he's someone who's targeting Creighton University doctors. Dr. Butra, who worked with both Dr. Hunter and Dr. Brumback. And I called her up one day, and she confirmed that the same day that Roger Brumback had been killed, someone had tried to break into her home, had been unable to gain entry, and had left. And when you synced the timing of these events, that break-in had occurred about an hour before whoever had broken in and killed the Brumbacks.
This is no coincidence. We have a family in 2008 in which the father in the house worked at Creighton University in the pathology department. We now have a murder in 2013 where the former head of the pathology department at Creighton University has been murdered. And we now have evidence that another member at Creighton University at their pathology department was targeted, although unsuccessfully.
There was a reason they chose to stab them in the right side of the neck. That is where the carotid artery is. Whoever did this certainly knew what they were doing. The police chief formed a task force. It was very clear that Creighton University and its pathology department was something that they needed to take a hard look at. So this time, they requested all of the records from the Creighton University pathology department, personnel records going back to 2000.
What they're looking for are, residents who've been dismissed, residents who were disgruntled or had made complaints, potentially other physicians that had problems, and they identify a few suspects among this group. So residents who had ended up leaving the program under, kind of a cloud, and they began looking at this list.
He had actually been in Creighton in the 2000 and 2001 school year, so it had, by now, it was been a dozen years had passed since he had even worked there. So that maybe didn't make him seem like the most likely suspect. As he started paging through it, he saw that Dr. Garcia had had some pretty significant conflicts with people at Creighton, including with Dr. Brumback.
Anthony's mom was born in Mexico. His father was actually born in the U.S. and fought in the Vietnam War. His mom was a nurse. His father worked as a postal worker. And both of them, and particularly his mom, seemed to have very, very high expectations for Anthony. She really dreamed that her oldest of three would become a doctor. When Anthony was in the second grade, he was diagnosed with a really severe reading disability, and that made school very challenging for him. However, he was really, really good at math, and he really excelled at that, and he learned to love it. And he always said that he wanted to be a mathematician, but his parents were so set on him becoming a doctor that seemed to take over his ambitions.
After graduating from the University of California at Davis, Garcia then enrolled in medical school at the University of Utah. And this really is an achievement, especially for somebody that did have difficulties throughout grade school and college with his academics.
Pretty quickly, during his residency, a number of things happen that really take his peers and his instructors aback. He is very resistant to any kind of constructive criticism, any kind of feedback. He tends to react very quickly and angrily to any of that if he's challenged in any way.
He had been a very bad resident. He behaved like a middle schooler. He was having constant conflicts with his professors.
He was reprimanded for yelling at a radiologist and losing his temper, and after this incident, as well as some other acts of unprofessionalism, his residency at this medical center was terminated.
Anthony goes home and he's very despondent, but he's very determined still to become a medical doctor and to finish a residency. And luckily for him, he gets a second chance. He is admitted to Creighton University, their pathology in Nebraska.
Unfortunately, he again falls to the same problems he did before in terms of lack of professionalism, having a short temper, and just really not meeting the grade of what's expected of a doctor.
And there was a physician there, Dr. Butra, who really thought of herself as a straight shooter. And she was very vocal in terms of giving him negative feedback in his evaluations. And this became a huge issue.
Dr. Hunter was trying to work with him. He was trying to get him to change his behavior. Dr. Hunter did not want to kick him out of this residency because he knew what a career killer that would be.
However, he is starting to see some of the same things that others are complaining about. Him being disrespectful to his other physicians, his teachers, him refusing to take responsibility, him alienating other medical students.
But finally, it got to the point where they had no choice. Garcia had attempted a prank against another resident who was taking a very high-stakes exam. Dr. Brumbach saw it as a clear effort by Dr. Garcia to sabotage this guy while he was taking this high-stakes exam.
Dr. Brumbach, who is head of this department, and Dr. Hunter end up signing this termination letter.
So at that point, he was gone. That firing ended up dogging him throughout his career.
He does end up getting a residency in psychiatry in Illinois, in Chicago, but yet he is starting to unravel.
He's admitted into a mental health facility. He had thoughts about killing himself and killing others. He also was struggling with alcoholism.
He ends up leaving the psychiatric residency and once again going back to California. He applies for a license to practice in Louisiana.
Dr. Garcia had not revealed to LSU that he had been previously fired from any other residencies. And so that was the cause that LSU then gave for terminating him from his job there, because he had essentially lied to them about his background.
At this point, it's become pretty clear to Garcia that his medical career is on the verge of being over. And he begins to absolutely just stew about the fact that in his mind, all of these things are unfair.
Garcia was really craving revenge. He was being declined his license where he wanted to work, and he decided that he had to pursue whoever was preventing him.
He is really focused on the members of the pathology department at Creighton University. He is focused on Dr. Butra. He is focused on Dr. Brumbach. And he is focused on Dr. Hunter. And he is incredibly angry. They had it out for him. He feels like they've sabotaged his career as a doctor.
That was a month before Tommy and Shirley were killed in the Hunter home. And so all of a sudden, the police had a potential trigger as to why Dr. Garcia, more than 7 years after he had been fired from Creighton, would turn around and target Bill Hunter. Detective Derek Moyse had just kind of a general report run on Dr. Garcia, everything from does he have a criminal record, where does he live, what kind of vehicles does he drive. As he looked through this report, he saw something that was very striking to him. He saw that around the time of the Hunter murders, Dr. Garcia had driven a Honda CR-V, and that was very significant to him because the neighbors who had reported seeing this olive-skinned man coming and going from the scene reported that he had been driving a silver Honda CR-V. Now, the records that he had didn't show what color the car was, so then he kind of ran down the VIN of this car, and it came back SIL, silver. The key to the case came when the cell phone records came back. They saw, right around the time of the Brumbach killings, there was only a single cell phone call in those records. And they didn't know anything about it other than the time of the call. And beyond that, there was just a geolocation. It placed Dr. Garcia's phone right across the river from Omaha. The credit card records came back, and they also placed him right in the Omaha area around the time of the Brumbach killings. It showed there was a purchase at a store called Gander Mountain. They made a subpoena and got the records for Gander Mountain, and sure enough, they showed that Anthony Garcia had bought a gun of the very same make and model that matched the pieces of gun that they had found inside the Brumbach home. They now knew Anthony Garcia had the motive to kill the Brumbachs. They now knew he had the means to kill him. They linked him to the gun, and they now knew he had the opportunity to do it as well because they had the phone records that placed him in Omaha. And that's when they knew we have everything we need to go after this guy. Even the arrest of Dr. Garcia kind of proved to be an adventure. The task force, and including FBI officers and Omaha police officers, they headed to a town in Indiana where Dr. Garcia was, but they were also tracking his cell phone. He had crossed over into Illinois, and he appeared to be headed south. They now knew he was crossing interstate lines. They were tailing him and trying to see what he was up to, and he continued to drive all the way through Illinois to the point where he was almost entering the state of Missouri, and they thought, we don't want him to cross into another state again. So they alerted the Illinois State Police that they wanted to stop this car. They stopped him after a very, very short pursuit, and they made the arrest.
I was actually in the grocery store with my kids, my two younger children at the time, getting some groceries, and I get a call from one of my uncles who tells me that they arrested a suspect in the case, and I'm like I just drop everything.
Derek Moyse, who was part of the task force, he then traveled to this town in southern Illinois to try to interview Dr. Garcia. Dr. Garcia, kind of refused to make any statements. But that while they were there, they also searched Dr. Garcia's car, and they found some pretty chilling things. They found another gun. They found directions on how to get to Louisiana State University, the other place where he had been fired from a residency before. They found his old lab coat from LSU, including the LSU logo.
The investigators firmly believe that he was on his way to kill more people that he held a grudge against. They find this note in the sink that is kind of wet, but they're able to kind of get it and read it. And it has all kinds of bizarre writings. And it's filled with violence, and it's filled with anger, and it's filled with talks about murder and homicide, and those kinds of things. It really does, I think, paint a very grim picture of where he is and what his thoughts are consisting of at this point. This is a man who is increasingly focused on violence.
There were documents related to his firing from Creighton. It appeared to these detectives that Dr. Garcia had been attempting to destroy these documents before leaving again to go exact revenge against these other doctors who he felt had wronged him.
He was really throwing away all the money he had on drugs and escorts.
He had taken a shining to Cecilia Hoffman and was constantly trying to ask her on dates.
She didn't have any interest in him. And so to discourage him, at one point she goes, "Oh, Dr. Tony," as she called him, and everybody there did, "You know, I could never date you because I only date really bad boys. And, you know, you're a doctor, etc." And he said, "Well, I'm a bad boy too." And then he proceeds to tell her that he had murdered people in the past, a young boy and an older woman.
He's essentially had confessed to her the killings of Tommy Hunter and Shirley Sherman. So this was huge. They right away knew Cecilia Hoffman is going to be a critical witness for us. Everything about this case took so long, you know. It took 5 years for them to identify and catch him. And it took 3 years for the case to go to trial.
Initially, there was some talk from his defense team about trying some kind of diminished capacity or some kind of mental health defense. And it became evident that even though he clearly had some mental health issues, that those were not going to rise to the level of a legal defense in terms of an insanity plea or anything like that.
There was someone going on trial for the murder of 3 elderly people and a young boy. The prospect of a death sentence hung over it too.
The courtroom was packed. My family was there. My uncle, Brad, he never missed a single day of that trial.
I don't think it's an understatement to say this was the biggest trial in the state of Nebraska in more than half a century. Reporters from all over the country actually came to cover this trial because that's just how sensational this case was. I was there every day, and it was the most amazing trial that I've ever covered. The prosecutor made the decision to try him on all 4 murders at the same time. They decided to put them all together for 2 reasons. A, because of the similarity of the killings, because they thought that similarity would increase their chances of getting a conviction. When it came to the Hunter killings, they only had 2 things going for them, really. They had the fact that he was driving a car that was similar to the one that was seen, and the fact that he had olive skin, I guess. attorneys also knew that Cecilia Hoffman was a very critical witness, and so he was set to do everything he could to impeach her and make her look like a dishonest person. And so the day that she took the stand in the trial, it was absolutely riveting. By this point, she had gotten away from being a stripper. She said, it was just a very bad time in my life. I was addicted to drugs. I was addicted to alcohol. Garcia's attorneys used all that against her, but she told the story of her cigarette break with Dr. Tony, where he had admitted to essentially the killings of Tommy and Shirley. Garcia's attorney went after her very hard. It got to the point where he was almost screaming at her in the courtroom. He brought her to tears on the stand, and you could just look in the faces of the jurors. They were not happy about what this attorney had done to her.
He showed no emotion during the trial. Sometimes he had headphones on or something. He'd be writing stuff down, and every once in a while he'd lift up a headphone and talk to his lawyer. But other than that, he paid zero attention during that whole trial, especially all the witnesses going on the stand and testifying against him.
His behavior in court is just kind of bizarre. And I can only imagine the impact it had on the jurors. There's no indication that he has remorse.
It was just crazy. It's like, dude, you're on trial for 4 homicides. Wouldn't you want to be at least been interested in what people are saying about you so you can rebuttal? So I don't know if he was doing it to put on a show, or I don't know if he was trying to make himself look incompetent. I'm not sure.
This essentially was a murder trial against him, and yet he really didn't seem that interested.
There were several physicians who talked about the possibility of Anthony Garcia having a personality disorder. When we look at Anthony Garcia and we see the amount of negative feedback and constructive criticism he received, and the fact that he refused over and over again to ever be introspective, to ever consider his role in anything, certainly implies somebody who's developed some very rigid and coping mechanisms that are consistent with what we see sometimes in a personality disorder.
When the jury came out, it was a unanimous guilty verdict. But you could hear a lot of sighs, a lot of crying in the courtroom. You can hear the relief. You could actually feel it.
There was a lot of back and forth on his mental state. And it appeared his mental state just kind of continued to deteriorate.
During the sentencing period, he had to be wheelchaired in, like he was asleep.
His eyes were shut the whole time. He never said a word or even looked up once during the entire sentencing phase, and we still don't really know what that was all about.
It all looked like a show, like an act, so maybe to sway the jury not to give him the death sentence, and we're not sure. Just a very weird person. To do what he did to 4 people, the way he did it, and you have no soul. Like you are soulless. You are the epitome of evil. I missed my weekly phone calls with my mom. I missed the family gatherings. I just miss her presence and her aura. I feel a lot of relief that he's never going to see the light of day ever again. Never is going to be let out to harm anyone again. He doesn't get to seek revenge on anybody ever again.
They gave me at least some closure.
It's just tragic that you had these lives cut short because of the personal vengeance of someone who blamed others for his own personal failure.
On Sunday, she didn't answer us, and neither on Monday.
The only communication that they had seemingly from her was by text message.
When details started to appear of what had actually happened, it causes a lot of concern, a lot of fear as well.
You could surmise that she'd been strangled or that the cord had actually caused her death.
A lot of the neighbours would have been shocked, but also extremely puzzled as to how this could have happened.
We were suspicious about the lies. It's big lies, you know?
I live every day with the fact that I was friends with the murderer.
At the edge of London lies the village-like suburb of Kew.
Kew is one of the most sought-after areas of London. It's in West London.
Kew is an extremely wealthy area, within commuting distance of the City of London, and its wonderful nature beside the river and the Royal Botanic Gardens.
It's very leafy, it's a very well-to-do kind of area. It's fairly low crime as well. So it's a nice area for people to live in.
There is definitely a village feel. We have a very small high street. You will find a lot of independent trades around Kew, which I think that's what people like.
There's a lot of artists and TV celebrities, and of course Sir David Attenborough lives there. It's a world-class site.
Kew was the perfect place for aspiring French filmmaker Laureline Garcia-Bateau to set up home in 2009.
Laureline was my best friend, my close friend. She was like a sister to me. We always be united. We always be in touch. We just developed a friendship, more than a friendship. Our children called her Auntie Lolo, and my daughter has her name. She was family.
She was a vivacious, very popular, well-liked young woman who was beautiful on the inside as well as on the outside. She was easy to like and was a very caring and considerate kind of person.
Future seemed bright for Laureline, and London was the place to help make her career ambitions come true.
She was born in Aix-en-Provence, but she came to London to pursue her dream of becoming a film producer.
Laureline had a lot of passion, but she developed a real passion for cinema. She was a passionate people. She was a determined people. She was a hard worker. She started her own production company. She got a Grammy as a production assistant on a movie with Dame Joan Collins. For us, it was nice and amazing, but I know for England was a dream, and it was a dream.
Despite a successful career, Laureline was happiest at home with her dogs.
Laureline was a dog lover. She loves animals. She had an Instagram of a video every day with her two dogs, Hailey, a husky, and Blake, a Rottweiler. Okay, so nice. They sleep on the bed, and we see that on Instagram every day. It's like her children for her.
And on top of her busy life in the UK, Laureline stayed in regular contact with her family and friends.
Laureline was very close to her family. Oh yes, she used to call her mom every day and maybe twice a day, on the morning and the evening. So the family for Laureline is everything. Family and friends and pets was everything.
In March 2019, Laureline was due to move out of her flat in Kew into a new place. Something friends and family were eagerly waiting to hear about.
On Sunday, she didn't answer us, neither on Monday, and it was already strange.
Certainly raised alarm bells the fact that Laureline had not spoken to her best friend and her mum and her family when she would normally speak to her mum every day and speak to her best friend very regularly as well. So the only communication that they had seemingly from her was by text message.
But there was something unusual about Laureline's texts.
Her friends had received some strange text messages from her that didn't really chime with the kind of person that they knew her to be. For example, her best friend said that she thought it was strange that she said that she was going on a shopping spree in Oxford Street because she knew that she usually shopped online and got all her clothes from online retailers. She described how she was looking forward to getting a boob job and liposuction. Certainly not the kind of thing that she would have said. So this kind of thing immediately raised alarms, and they were very, very concerned that she just seemed to be communicating by text message, but nobody had seen her.
Confused by Laureline's strange behaviour, her sister-in-law makes her way to the property in Kew.
And when she couldn't find her, she alerted the police.
Laureline was reported missing on the 6th of March 2019, and that means that a police officer would be dispatched to talk to her about her concerns and take a report. The missing persons inquiry started with questions to her sister-in-law and potentially any friends that could be found to say, have you seen her? Can you tell us when you last saw her? And the concern was raised because her sister-in-law had visited the address and she could hear dogs barking, Laureline's dogs, and no sign of Laureline. Laureline was a lover of dogs, so she would never leave her dogs alone. They were her children, essentially, at the time. And also, because it was now Tuesday, Laureline had failed to turn up for work, so work colleagues were now concerned. So you had a lot of people voicing their concern about where Laureline was, and that made it a concern for the police because this was completely out of character and completely unusual behaviour.
Police begin their inquiries by also visiting Laureline's address.
In a missing persons inquiry, police will attend an address, the place where the person lives, because within that premises you might find something to indicate where they've gone. It might be a ticket, it might be a receipt, it could be anything. And also you want to make sure that they haven't come to harm behind locked doors. So there would be a natural instinct for officers to get into that premises, and quite often that's by breaking in to check on the welfare of somebody, and that's what they did in this case. The officers went in, searched the premises, and she was not anywhere. But what officers could see inside that address was the boxes all still ready to be packed.
It looked as if she was just about to move out. Her belongings were all boxed up, ready as if she was about to move out of the flat straight away. So it looked like the home had been disrupted in some way.
Back at the police station, officers assess the risk of Laureline's disappearance.
A missing person is graded low, medium or high risk, and different things happen at different levels. In the low risk, you've got people who perhaps there's no particular harm that you can think, they might just have gone away, and the concern is quite low for them. Medium risk, slightly more work is done around that because people are concerned, but it might be within their character to go away for a weekend or something like that, so it's not necessarily out of character. Whereas you have the high risk category, and that's where Laureline sat, because this was completely out of character.
After reviewing the case as high risk, police returned to Laureline's address for a more detailed search.
They went out into the garden using torches. And in the garden, they had a look around and they could see various items leaning up against a fence, so a spade, shovel, other items that you would use in general gardening, and a bag of compost as well on the right-hand fence. And one of the officers then turned attention to the flower bed on the left-hand side as you walked into the garden and noticed that it was completely brand new in one section. The CID officer moved the soil back closest to them and identified what they thought was the shape of a foot sticking out in essentially a shallow grave. And just a few more scrapes to see what was there made them believe that what they had found was indeed a body.
Police searching for missing French filmmaker Laureline Garcia-Berteau have discovered a body buried in her back garden.
As soon as you find a body in a shallow grave in a premises, it becomes a murder inquiry straight away because that person doesn't put themselves there. And that's when the process of the team start to make their own inquiries and all the different actions that come out of that initial deployment begin in earnest.
With a murder investigation in progress, police secured the scene.
We had a lot of this area all cordoned off, a lot of crime scene tents here, because as you bring items out of the garden as well, you need to put them somewhere which is forensically sterile. And so we tried to utilise the area out the back of the premises for that reason. So here really behind the house, the alleyway that we used, and trying to set up a forensic retrieval here was quite difficult because the wind was so strong, it was hard. And obviously knowing how detailed you've got to be and how, to avoid any contamination because it is windy and also you're dealing with an outside scene, it's particularly more complex than you would expect an inner scene to be.
Arrive on scene, having been called by the homicide assessment team, usually, and we'll receive a briefing from the local borough police about what the incident involves and why it may be suspicious. Once you've had a briefing, be wearing protective clothing, mask over shoes, gloves, scene suit, and entering the scene to look for to see what has occurred.
The crime scene managers in charge of that scene forensically, whether they be physical exhibits that are taken out of a premises or whether they are swabs or fingerprints, they're in charge of running that scene.
The recovery of the body is totally down to the archaeologist, and he'll work in tandem with an anthropologist. Their speciality is bone analysis, who died, how they died and where they died. Working together, they can rapidly maximise the recording, interpretation and recovery of the body.
As the team removes several inches of soil, it becomes clear that the individual is in fact female.
Obviously, your first thought is, well, Laureline Garcia-Berteau is missing, and we have a body in the garden, and it's suspicious that she's missing. So, obviously, my thought is straight away, well, this is probably going to be Laureline. But you don't go to a family with probablys. You have to be sure.
As forensic archaeologists continue digging, the level of brutality on the victim becomes clear.
Once the body was removed from the ground, she was lying on her back, naked. She was wrapped in a mattress, and there was silver duct tape around the area of where the knees and the neck were. The mattress was then wrapped in a cord around the middle of it, but around her neck she had an electric wire. She had a head bag on, and her arms were tied behind her back with duct tape. You could surmise that she'd been strangled or that the cord had actually caused her death. You couldn't see the rest of the body to determine what else was there. She may have been stabbed for all we know, but that wouldn't be able to be looked at until we got to the mortuary.
As the body is taken to the mortuary to establish a cause of death and identify the victim, news of the murder spreads.
For a young woman body to be dug up in a garden in Kew. It would have been, almost unheard of in a neighbourhood like that. A lot of the neighbours would have been shocked, but also extremely puzzled as to how this could have happened.
I haven't ever heard of a murder in Kew.
It's quite shocking to hear a murder in Kew. It's not normally norms of anything.
When details started to appear of what had happened, people become very concerned about, something that's happening in your neighbourhood. It causes a lot of concern, a lot of fear as well.
At the mortuary, the post-mortem gets underway.
Once the body arrives for the post-mortem, he would look at both sides of the body for any bruising, any wounds, anything that stands out to him. There was no obvious bruising around the neck, but once you get the body opened up and get under the skin, then the bruising can be seen. You're checking the hyoid bone, the bone under the neck, see if it's fractured, and then it results in the conclusion that death had been compression of the neck, believed via strangulation.
With the cause of death established, it isn't long before the individual is identified as none other than Laureline Garcia-Berteau.
I was in my car alone, and I just remember that it was Laureline's mother I had on phone. So I just said the word, is it her? Is she dead? And I hung up. I remember I screamed. I never screamed like that. It's taken a part of me. She was like my little sister, It's taken a part of me.
The investigation into Laureline's murder ramps up, and initial theories are considered. Could this be a burglary gone wrong?
It's a very attractive area for a burglar because there's a lot of assets there.
So if someone's forced their way into the address and killed somebody, and then that person has disappeared, we need to identify them as soon as we can. So we'll be looking to make a light source examination, any finger marks that are not seen to the naked eye. Fingerprint examination, we'll be looking for any DNA that we can find, possibly cigarette ends. Things have been moved by the suspect. He may have opened drawers, cupboards, so we'll be looking to examine those, DNA. He may have cut himself somewhere, so it may have drops of blood that he's left behind.
But a closer examination begins to cast doubts on a suspected burglary.
If it had been a burglary gone wrong, you wouldn't expect them to hang around and attempt to hide the body in the way that it had been.
Police take into consideration Laureline's plans to move home around the time of her murder.
Could the movers have been involved? Could it have been a handyman that had, come round and helped box up her belongings?
After making their inquiries, police discovered that no removal firm had attended the address. So focus switches to Laureline's personal life.
Certainly from her communication with her friends, it was suggested that when she'd last spoken to her sister-in-law, she was looking forward to going on a date with a vet that she'd met. But it was very unclear whether that date had actually taken place or who he was, even. There was very little information given. Who had she been talking to online or dating apps? Maybe she met somebody else. That was certainly something that could be unravelled through looking into her mobile phone and computer.
Police decide to try to look into Laureline's last movements to see if they hold any clues.
You look at things like Laureline's finance, so where has she spent money, which indicates that she might have been to a certain place, like a restaurant, which we found out on Friday the 1st. She'd been to a restaurant, and then that venue itself has CCTV.
The CCTV shows Laureline dining with a man, with the pair holding hands. And inquiries with those closest to Laureline soon identified him.
Laureline was in a on-off relationship for quite a number of years with a man called Kirill Belarusov. And this relationship had been going on for 8+ years, but had kind of fizzled out a couple of years beforehand, but they still saw each other on and off. And so they were aware that Kirill was in the UK as an Estonian national in the UK to come and help her move that weekend.
Police continue to scour CCTV around the area. Both are later seen on bus CCTV, heading in the direction towards Laureline's home in Kew. It seems Kirill may have been one of the last people to see Laureline alive. But when police try to locate him, they find they are too late.
They had discovered that Kirill was actually no longer in the UK. He had flown to Tallinn in Estonia.
Belarusov has left the country.
Police investigating the murder of Laureline Garcia-Bateau want to speak to her ex-lover, Kirill Belarusov, as he may have been one of the last people to see her. But police discover that he has left the country.
The CID officers got in contact with Kirill Belarusov via a telephone number they had for him, which was given to them by the family. And they made contact straight away. He behaved like he didn't know what had happened, and the last time he saw her, she was alive.
Kirill tells police he was helping Laureline move on the Saturday, before she left Kew to move to a new address. But when asked further about this last encounter with Laureline, he doesn't give clear answers.
He was being obstructive, in our opinion, kept avoiding the question. I wanted him back in the country because I wanted to speak to him face to face, but he kept making excuses why he wasn't coming back, or saying, yes, I'm just going to sort it out, and then nothing would happen. He could do everything he could to come back. He was saying he'd be back on one day, that day would go past, we'd ring him and he'd say, I couldn't make it, I'm going to do another day, and this just kept pushing back and pushing back. And you get to a point where you think, well, that's enough. I know he's trying to avoid him coming back.
I think the fact that Belarusov is not keen to help the police in their inquiries, considering that Laureline had been his partner for the best part of 10 years, is extremely suspicious. And the fact that he left the country around the time of her disappearance as well would have raised alarm bells.
Kirill Belarusov soon became the #1 suspect in the inquiry.
But with Kirill refusing to come back, police need to apply for an extradition order.
The police have a fairly complicated process to get someone back from another country. British police can apply for a European arrest warrant, which is what they did. So they applied to get Belarusov back from Estonia, where he was at the time.
But for the Crown Prosecution Service to agree, the police need to prove they have enough of a case against Kirill.
When you get a European arrest warrant, as this was, when you bring them back into the country, you have no power to interview them. So you have to do everything without asking them a question, which is very, very difficult, because you're giving, firstly, someone the ability to explain, but also you have to reach that threshold of evidence, which means that as soon as they set foot back in this country, you can charge them straight away with the murder.
With police needing to build a firm case against Kirill, they start to dig into his life.
I met Kirill whilst working in a nightclub. It was called Egg, and we started working together, and that's how we met. Kirill was very charming. He was very nice. He was not, arrogant or trying to tell his side of the story. He was always waiting for you to ask a question before bragging or saying anything. Kirill told me about Laureline when we met. He didn't say her name, but he mentioned that he had an ex-girlfriend that he was really in love with, and that they broke up.
But Sabrina recalls how Kirill later spoke in more detail about his and Laureline's relationship and claims she had cheated on him.
He mentioned that he'd had cancer before and that he couldn't have babies anymore, and that one time his ex fell pregnant and she didn't know that he couldn't have babies, and that's how he found out that she cheated, and that's how the relationship ended. He would always say that it was his fault and that she was very caring and that it was hard on her, the fact that he had cancer. So he wasn't blaming her, but he was saying that's how they ended it.
Sabrina remembers the last time she saw Kirill before he left the UK for his home country of Estonia.
The last time I saw Kirill, he told me before that he was going to die, that his cancer was terminal, and that was the last time I was ever going to see him. He said he saw this house, I'm about to die, let's go dinner. And I went to that restaurant crying. I cried most of the night saying, I'm going to lose my friend.
With police still unable to question Kirill to see if his account of his illness is true, they turn to Laureline's finances to try to establish her whereabouts the weekend of her murder.
Through continued interrogation of finances, we see that on Saturday, round about 10:15 in the morning, that there are transactions in Pets at Home and Sainsbury's, all local to where Laureline lived. So again, officers are there as quickly as possible to identify CCTV opportunities. And there you see Kirill Belarusov with Laureline again. So now we know he's with her in the morning.
At a glance, all appears to be fine. But when police look at Laureline's finances a day later on the Sunday, there appears to be no sign of any purchases. Instead, they look into Kirill's finances.
So we start to look at transactions that Kirill might have made as well. And what you could see on Sunday the 3rd of March was Kirill had left and had gone to a local retail park, similar to where Laureline and he had been the day before. He'd been to Sainsbury's, been to Homebase, and been to convenience stores through that morning, and was purchasing items which were highly suspicious. They were the rubble sacks that matched the rubble sacks that were found on Laureline's body. He had purchased an axe, which we never found, and he had purchased soil or compost, as it was. As you can see the CCTV of him, identifying him clearly as the person purchasing those items. And so you could say straight away then that it's very, very clear what he was up to. That was now that Laureline had been killed and he was thinking of ways to dispose of her body.
With Kirill's behaviour raising suspicions, police approached the CPS.
We had to go to the Crown Prosecution Service and prove what we had using all of the information we had: CCTV, finance, witness statements, the crime scene itself, the condition of Laureline's body, and that was something which was very, very difficult, but we were able to prove at that point that we had enough evidence to secure an arrest of Kirill Belarusov. And that gives you the ability to get a European arrest warrant and bring them back. He was brought back on the 20th of March and charged with the murder of Laureline. Kirill Belarusov will go to court the following day, to a magistrate's court, where, because it's murder, they send it to the Crown Court, and then he's due to enter a plea some 8 weeks later, and that plea is not guilty. So we knew at that point we are going to trial with him at some stage in 2019.
And as the case is prepared for trial, potential witnesses are called in by the police and prosecution.
The police called me saying, "We want to talk to you about your friend Kirill," and I thought they were calling me to say that he was dead. They told me he's been arrested, he's killed someone. I was in shock. I was like, "Are you sure that it is the right person?" And they said, "Yes." You don't murder, you don't think that you knew a murderer?
Kirill Belarusov has been charged with the murder of his ex-partner, Laureline Garcia-Berteau. The trial begins at the Old Bailey in London, and the prosecution open their case against Kirill with DNA evidence from the crime scene.
The flex that was used to tie Laureline's hands behind her back, you could see that flex on the floor in the living room where it had been cut. And indeed, the forensic testing showed that Kirill Belarusov's DNA was at the cut part of that flex.
The jury hears of the early relationship between Laureline and Kirill.
At the beginning, she called him my Superman. He's tall, very helpful, especially with women. You know. He came to spend a few days with Laureline at my home. He ate at my parents' table. He was a Superman. A good boy.
And Kirill had even boasted of his career achievements to Laureline.
He had told people he was a stuntman and that he'd worked on films with famous people like Brad Pitt, and that he was training people. We searched in the industries at Hollywood, and we searched in the UK IMDb to see where was he in these films, and they're always shown if you work on there. He was nowhere to be found. These were all complete and utter lies that he told everybody.
But the lies did not stop there.
He began to say to lots of people that he was sick and that he had 10 years left to live.
He didn't talk much about his cancer. You ask him question and he would say, I'm bleeding from every hole. I've been puking for the last 3 days. I think it's just once where I said, if you don't mind me asking, what is the cancer? Where is it? And he said, oh, it's the pancreas, it's the liver area. And then the time after he would be like, oh, it's spread everywhere. But he would never give any more details. He'd just say, I'm a guinea pig. They've opened me up and stitched me. They keep on opening me up. But he wasn't very specific.
Loreline's mother, friends, and I found it very strange because he has nothing in front of us. When we saw Kirill, a wedding day or for a holiday, we can't imagine he's sick.
I've never known someone who had cancer. So when I saw him with the shaved head, I didn't question it. I didn't think he still had eyebrows. And I didn't know that you lose your eyebrows when you have chemo.
We were suspicious about the lies. Big lies, you know. We were suspicious. We tell that to Loreline. We explained to her to open her eyes, but she was in love.
And we were discovering that almost all of his entire life that he told people about was a complete lie. Saying you've got cancer when you don't have, for me, is the low of the low.
The prosecution also reveals to the court more about Kirill's double life.
Every time he suggested he was going in for treatment to a hospital in London or just outside of London, what he was actually doing was going to stay with another girlfriend in London. That girlfriend also was told the same lie by him, that he had cancer. So when he was not with her and saying that he was away for a few days, he was going to stay with Loreline.
It's only when I sat down in court that I realised that he was texting the three of us at the same time, his girlfriend, Loreline and me. So it was really like juggling between the three of us. With me, he was supposed to be in Russia having treatment, and then he was actually in London seeing Loreline, talking to Loreline. I felt like a fool. I felt so stupid. It was so shocking.
The prosecution described that as Loreline's film career began to take off, Kirill may have looked towards her with envy.
He wanted a career in films as well, to a certain extent. He wanted to be a stuntman. But he wasn't, and he couldn't have been, because he didn't have the skills to do that. His only skill was lying, whereas she was genuinely talented, and she was very, very hardworking, and she was prepared to earn her place in her chosen career. So I think there probably was an element of jealousy in the relationship.
But it's details of a debt owed to Loreline which could point towards a motive for murder.
She had given him so much money over the course of their relationship, and we knew you were talking plus £17,000 at least at that point. And that was getting to the point where he had to pay that money back. In November 2018, Loreline had sent a message to Kirill, and this was saying, you don't realise how much in debt, how much in trouble I am. I can't pay my rent. You need to pay me the money back. And from friends and family, we would always hear stories where he would promise this money. It's coming, I've got this job, this stuntman job, whatever it might be, which was all lies. So he knew he could never pay that back. That could be one motive. Secondly, she was at that point in her life now where she was ready to move on, away from him. And she was effectively a source of income for him as well. And that was about to dry up.
To the court's surprise, Kirill gives evidence.
I think the most shocking about the trial was himself. He took the stand and spoke, and it was just, I think it lasted 2 days, and it was 2 days of horror. Every word that was coming out of his mouth was horrible. The way he talked about me, the way he talked about Loreline, the way he saw himself, the arrogance in his voice. I remember sitting down terrified because I had been so close to him and just thinking that man is a monster. It was traumatizing.
I always think about the people over the years that have been in front of you in a trial, and he's probably right up there as the most evil-looking eyes I think I've ever seen. And because behind it you can see that he really doesn't care. You know, his image and what he's portrayed himself as is more important than anything else. And he was really, really unpleasant and arrogant beyond belief during the entire 4-week trial at the Old Bailey.
The court hears how in March 2019, Laureline begged Kirill one last time to pay back what was owed to her. But instead, he used this opportunity to kill Laureline.
You have the timeline of them going out on the Friday night, which we can see. You have the timeline of them going shopping on Saturday morning. She had booked a removal company ready for Saturday, but she didn't know where she was moving to because Kirill Belarusov had said he has found somewhere for her to move to. She had no money because he owed her a lot of money. She kept asking him, where am I going? And you could see that through telephone contact. But where is this address? I need to tell my removal company where we're going. And so the removal company basically said, well, I can't move you to nowhere. So it was all cancelled. Kirill Belarusov comes up with a new lie. He's organised a removal company for her.
But the removal company never came.
And you get to the point then where Laureline is panicking because she doesn't know where she's going, and she's clearly getting to that point in the evening where on that Saturday she's starting to disbelieve what he's saying. And that's when everything goes quiet.
It's at this point that Kirill strangled Laureline with a cord. And the following morning, he was seen in local shops purchasing suspicious items.
Kirill had been out and bought these items on the Sunday morning, which were used to cover the body of Laureline.
After returning to Laureline's home to bury her body, Kirill used her phone to send fake texts to Laureline's friends and family to buy some time.
He foolishly used Google Translate to try and reply to the family members in French, and obviously it's not going to sound very credible. It's not going to sound like Laureline, not the words that she would use, and the translation was extremely clunky, so it was immediately quite suspicious.
And at the time that those messages were being sent, he was using the Wi-Fi of the address itself. So that puts him inside the address using her phone, sickeningly looking at pornography at the same time he's sending these messages, knowing full well that in that house is Laureline's body. And that really shows you what kind of person he is. It's very difficult to comprehend a person who has that kind of personality, that very strange and almost psychotic personality.
By the time concerned family and friends of Laureline get in touch with Kirill about her disappearance, he's leaving the country for Estonia.
I put my phone with video with him. I saw that he was in the airport. So I asked him, you are in the airport and your lovely Laureline is missing. Why are you leaving? There's no explanation, but he leaves.
After a grueling trial at the Old Bailey, the jury returns its verdict. Kirill Belarusov is found guilty of murder and is sentenced to 24 years in prison.
About the verdict, we can't say that we are happy because our friend will never come again. But we are grateful for the jury and the judge to having seen him the real way he is and to not allow him to do that again to another woman.
But even with Laureline's killer behind bars, the impact of his crimes are long-lasting.
Today, we are more mistrusting. Today, when my friend meets a man, I want to know everything. I want to know where she is, the address. It changed all of our lives.
This entire story definitely had an effect on me. He destroyed so many lives, not just Laureline's. So many people that have been touched by his lies, so many people that believed he was such a nice person. And I think we were all a bit destroyed because we were all fooled and none of us saw anything, and if just one of us saw something, she could still be alive.